The galaxy was quiet for the first time in 300 years. Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire pressed his clawed hand against the cold metal of his ship's viewport and stared at the debris field that stretched beyond sight. Twisted metal hulks drifted like ghosts through space, the remains of what had once been the mighty Korthak battle fleet. His own ship, the Eternal Dawn, was scarred and patched from countless battles, held together by emergency repairs and the stubborn will of its crew. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up movement in Sector 7, Lieutenant Zara called from her station. Her voice carried the same exhaustion that plagued every survivor of the Great War. "Energy signatures suggest scavenger ships." Veltar nodded without turning from the viewport. Scavengers had become common since the ceasefire. Every minor species in the galaxy was picking through the wreckage of the two greatest military powers ever known. The Zephyrian Empire had once commanded 10,000 warships. Now Veltar counted himself lucky to have 12 vessels still capable of jumping between star systems. The war had ended not with victory or defeat, but with mutual destruction. Both the Zephyrian Empire and the Korthak Alliance had thrown everything they had at each other for 3 centuries. Planets had been burned from orbit, entire star systems evacuated, and billions of lives lost in the endless cycle of attack and revenge. In the end, neither side had the strength to continue fighting. The peace treaty had been signed on Sanctuary, a neutral moon that belonged to no faction. Veltar remembered standing in that sterile conference room, watching the Korthak delegation across the table. War Chief Graxith had looked as tired as Veltar felt. The massive insectoid warrior who had once led armies across a dozen worlds could barely keep his antenna straight. They had all known the truth that neither side wanted to admit. The war had destroyed them both. Now the galaxy belonged to younger civilizations. The Altarian Council controlled the core systems with their silver fleets and diplomatic ceremonies. The Vagan Confederacy had claimed the Outer Rim territories, while the Centauri Republic expanded into the abandoned sectors. These species had stayed out of the Great War, content to watch from the sidelines as the two military giants tore each other apart. "Commander, should we investigate the energy signatures?" Zara asked. "No," Veltar replied. "Let the scavengers have their salvage. We have enough problems keeping our own ships running." He was right about that. The Eternal Dawn's life support systems were failing, her weapons were operating at half power, and her jump drive needed repairs that would take months they didn't have. Most of the crew hadn't seen their homeworlds in over a year. The Zephyrian Empire existed now only in name, a scattered collection of damaged ships trying to maintain some dignity in defeat. Veltar turned away from the viewport and walked to his command chair. The bridge was dimly lit to conserve power, and several stations sat empty because they no longer had enough crew to man them. He looked at the tactical display showing the local systems. Red markers indicated areas too dangerous to enter due to radiation or unexploded mines. Yellow markers showed contested territories where various factions fought over salvage rights. Green markers were safe zones, mostly controlled by the new powers who had inherited the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Zephyrians and Korthak had fought their war believing they were struggling for control of the galaxy. Instead, they had simply cleared the way for others to take what they had destroyed themselves trying to claim. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Altarian Council," Communications Officer Naltos announced. "Put it through," Veltar said, settling into his chair. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the elegant face of Prime Minister Zelnos. The Altarian leader's silver skin gleamed in the light of his ship's bridge, and his eyes held the confidence of someone who had never known real defeat. "Commander Veltar," Zelnos said in his melodious voice, "the Council wishes to discuss the disposition of the Kepler 442 system. Our salvage teams require unimpeded access to conduct their operations." Veltar felt a surge of anger. Kepler 442 had been a Zephyrian military base for over 2 centuries. Thousands of his people had died defending it during the war's final phase. Now the Altarians wanted to strip it for scrap metal. "The system remains under Zephyrian jurisdiction," Veltar replied carefully. Zelnos smiled, an expression that looked beautiful and cold at the same time. "Commander, with respect, your empire lacks the resources to enforce such claims. The Council offers fair compensation for salvage rights." The words stung because they were true. Veltar had 12 ships against the Altarian Council's 2,000. He could make noble speeches about honor and sovereignty, but in the end might made right in the new galaxy. I will consider your proposal, Veltar said finally. Excellent, Zelnos replied. The Council looks forward to your response. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in uncomfortable silence. Veltar knew his crew was watching him, waiting to see how their commander would handle yet another humiliation. The proud Zephyrian Empire, which had once made entire star systems tremble at the mention of its name, was now reduced to begging for scraps from species they had barely considered worthy of notice. Sir, Zara said quietly, sensors are detecting more movement in the outer system. Multiple contacts moving in formation, Veltar frowned. Scavengers didn't travel in formation. Can you identify them? Negative, sir. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. They're maintaining standard approach vectors but not responding to our hails. How many ships? Difficult to determine, sir. At least 20, possibly more. They're using some kind of stealth technology that's interfering with our scans. Veltar leaned forward in his chair. In his experience, unknown ships traveling in military formation rarely brought good news. All stop. Defensive posture. Charge the plasma cannons. Sir, weapons are only operating at 60% capacity, Weapons Officer Kazran reported. Then we'll make do with 60%, Veltar replied. The unknown ships continued their approach, ignoring all attempts at communication. Veltar watched the tactical display as the contacts resolved into clearer images. The ships were unlike anything he had seen before. They appeared to be constructed primarily of metal, rather than the composite materials favored by most spacefaring species. Their design was angular and utilitarian, lacking the elegant curves of Altarian vessels or the organic shapes preferred by the Korthak. Sir, they're dropping out of faster-than-light travel, Zara announced. 24 ships confirmed. They're taking up positions around us. Veltar studied the formation on his screen. It was clearly military in nature, but the tactics were unfamiliar. These ships weren't arranging themselves for a conventional attack. Instead, they seemed to be creating a perimeter that would allow them to control the local space, while maintaining multiple escape routes. Unknown vessels. This is Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire. He broadcast on all frequencies. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came immediately, transmitted in accented but clear galactic standard. Commander Veltar, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Defiance. We come seeking dialogue. Earth. Veltar accessed his ship's database and found the entry quickly. Sol system, third planet inhabited by a species called humans. The file was marked as outdated and incomplete. According to the records, humans had achieved spaceflight but lacked faster-than-light capability. They were classified as a primitive species of no strategic importance. Captain Morrison, Veltar replied, you are operating in Zephyrian space. By what authority do you claim the right to seek dialogue? By the authority of superior numbers and better positioning, Morrison answered. His voice carried a calm confidence that made Veltar's scales prickle with unease. We've been watching your war, Commander. Very educational. The implications hit Veltar like a plasma bolt to the chest. A species that had observed the greatest military conflict in galactic history, learning from it while remaining hidden. He suddenly understood why the human formation looked unfamiliar. These beings had studied Zephyrian and Korthak tactics for centuries, developing countermeasures and improvements. What do you want? Veltar asked. To discuss the future, Morrison replied. The war may be over, Commander, but the galaxy still needs leadership. We're here to provide it. Veltar looked at his tactical display again. 24 human ships against his 12 damaged vessels. But numbers weren't everything. His ships were battle-tested, crewed by veterans who had survived 3 centuries of warfare. These humans might have superior technology, but they lacked experience. And if we decline your offer of dialogue? Veltar asked. Morrison's response chilled him to the bone. Then we'll discuss the future with someone else. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Veltar realized that everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. The galaxy's new chapter wasn't being written by the Altarians, or the Vegans, or any of the other civilizations that had inherited the ruins of the Great War. It was being written by a species that nobody had considered important enough to worry about. A species that had been preparing while everyone else was destroying themselves. The war was over, but as Captain Morrison had implied, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the Zephyrian ships maintain their defensive formation. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy Chen, monitored the alien vessels from her station while the rest of the crew waited for orders. Morrison had spent years preparing for this moment, studying every available record of galactic warfare and alien psychology. Now it was time to put that knowledge to use. "Sir, the Zephyrian commander is requesting a face-to-face meeting," Communications Officer Brad Taylor reported. "He wants to discuss terms on neutral ground." Morrison smiled. The alien was thinking in terms of traditional diplomacy, expecting negotiations between equals. That was exactly what Morrison had hoped for. "Tell Commander Veltar that we'll meet aboard his ship in 1 hour. I'll be bringing a small diplomatic team." "Sir, is that wise?" Chen asked. "We don't know if we can trust them." "Trust isn't the issue," Morrison replied. "They need to see that we're not afraid of them. Fear is what ended their war, and fear is what will make them listen to us." An hour later, Morrison transported aboard the Eternal Dawn with only 2 escorts, Sergeant Lisa Park and Technical Specialist Ryan Foster. The Zephyrian ship's interior was dimly lit and showed obvious signs of battle damage. Makeshift repairs were visible throughout the corridors, and the air recycling system hummed with an unhealthy sound that suggested it was working beyond its design limits. Commander Veltar met them in the ship's main conference room. The Zephyrian was tall and reptilian, with scales that had once been bright green but were now dulled by exhaustion and stress. His uniform was clean but patched in several places. Morrison recognized the signs of a military commander trying to maintain dignity despite overwhelming circumstances. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said, his translator rendering his words in careful English, "you and your people are welcome aboard my ship." Morrison nodded respectfully. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Commander. I know trust doesn't come easily after what your people have endured." Veltar gestured for them to sit at the conference table. "You said you've been watching our war. For how long?" 200 years, Morrison answered honestly. "Ever since your fleets first entered the Outer Rim territories near our space. We've been learning from your conflict, studying your tactics and technology." The Zephyrian commander's eyes widened slightly. 200 years of observation without contact. "Your species is more patient than most." "We had to be," Morrison said. "We weren't ready to face either the Empire or the Alliance directly. So we waited and we learned and we prepared." Lieutenant Zara entered the room carrying a datapad. She whispered something to Veltar in their native language, and Morrison noticed the commander's expression change. Veltar looked at the human captain with new understanding. "My intelligence officer has been reviewing your ship's capabilities," Veltar said slowly. "Your vessels appear to use primitive technology compared to our own, yet they move with a coordination that suggests advanced tactical systems." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Commander, what's the most important lesson of warfare?" "Superior firepower," Veltar replied without hesitation. "Wrong," Morrison said. "The most important lesson is that the side with better logistics wins. Your Empire and the Korthak Alliance both forgot that. You focused on building bigger weapons and stronger shields while your supply line stretched across half the galaxy." Veltar was quiet for a moment. "And humans understand logistics?" "We understand efficiency," Morrison replied. "Our ships might not have the best weapons or the strongest shields, but they're reliable. They don't break down after 2 years of combat. They don't require exotic materials that can only be found in 3-star systems. And most importantly, they're designed to be repaired in the field with basic tools." Sergeant Park spoke up for the first time. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Stewart." Morrison nodded. "Put it through." The holographic projector in the center of the table activated, showing the image of Admiral Kevin Stewart aboard the UES Liberty. Stewart was a veteran of Earth's own wars, a man whose gray hair and scarred face told the story of decades spent in military service. "Captain Morrison," Stewart said, "I hope your negotiations are proceeding smoothly. I have an update on our other diplomatic contacts." "Go ahead, Admiral." "Captain Nicole Adams has made contact with the Korthak remnant fleet in the Vega sector. Their war chief Graxith was initially hostile, but he's agreed to talks after seeing our tactical capabilities. Captain Tony Rodriguez has established contact with the Altarian Council, and they're requesting a formal meeting to discuss trade agreements." Morrison saw Veltar's expression change as he processed this information. The Zephyrian commander was realizing that humanity wasn't just making contact with his faction. They were simultaneously engaging with every major power in the galaxy. Thank you, Admiral, Morrison said. Continue with the diplomatic protocols. Morrison out. The transmission ended, leaving the conference room in silence. Veltar looked at Morrison with something approaching respect. You're coordinating first contact with multiple civilizations simultaneously, Veltar said. That requires extensive planning and resources. It requires understanding the situation, Morrison corrected. The galaxy isn't divided between two powers anymore. It's fragmented among dozens of factions, each trying to claim territory and resources. We're simply offering a better alternative, which is... Morrison stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the debris field beyond. Unity under human leadership. We didn't come here to conquer the galaxy, Commander. We came here to manage it. Veltar followed him to the viewport. And if we refuse your management? Then you'll continue fighting over scraps while your civilizations slowly die, Morrison said bluntly. Look around you, Commander. Your ship is falling apart, your crew is exhausted, and your empire exists only in name. The Korthak are in the same situation. Meanwhile, species like the Altarians are moving in to claim everything you fought to protect. The words stung because they were true. Veltar had seen the reports from across former Zephyrian space. Mining operations run by alien corporations, trade routes controlled by neutral powers, and military bases being dismantled for scrap metal. The empire his people had died to defend was being sold piece by piece. What exactly are you proposing? Veltar asked. Morrison turned from the viewport. Integration. Your ships join our fleet under human command. Your people receive new technology and training. In exchange, you help us establish order in the galaxy. And if our people refuse? Morrison's expression hardened slightly. Commander, we've studied your military doctrine for 2 centuries. We know every tactic you've ever used, every weakness in your formations, every mistake that cost you battles. We've had time to develop countermeasures for everything. The threat was delivered calmly, but its implications were clear. Humanity had spent 200 years preparing for this moment. They understood galactic warfare better than the species who had been fighting it. You're asking us to surrender our independence, Veltar said. I'm asking you to choose survival, Morrison replied. The war between the Empire and the Alliance is over. The question now is whether you want to be part of what comes next, or whether you want to be swept aside by it. Veltar looked at his damaged ship, his exhausted crew, and the debris field that represented everything his people had lost. He thought about the Altarian salvage teams picking through Zephyrian military bases, and the Vegan corporations claiming territory that had once belonged to the Empire. I'll need to consult with my remaining fleet commanders, Veltar said finally. Of course, Morrison replied. But Commander, don't take too long. The galaxy is changing rapidly, and those who hesitate will be left behind. As Morrison and his team prepared to leave, Veltar realized that everything had changed. The humans weren't just another faction seeking to exploit the post-war chaos. They were the future, whether the galaxy liked it or not. The war might be over, but humanity had just begun to reshape everything in their image. Prime Minister Xelnos of the Altarian Council sat in his crystalline chair aboard the flagship Silver Dawn and reviewed the intelligence reports with growing irritation. The reports described a species called humans who had appeared in multiple systems simultaneously, claiming to represent something called the United Earth Federation. According to the data, they possess several hundred ships of apparently primitive design. Intelligence Director Kavtar, Xelnos said in his melodious voice, explained to me how a previously unknown species managed to achieve faster-than-light travel without our knowledge. Kavtar's silver skin flickered with nervous patterns. Prime Minister, our monitoring stations in the Outer Rim were focused on tracking Zephyrian and Korthak movements during the final phase of their war. It's possible that these humans developed their technology in an unmonitored sector. Possible, Xelnos repeated coldly. And now they're making contact with the war survivors, claiming to offer leadership to the galaxy. How many ships do they actually possess? Our estimates range from 300 to perhaps 800 vessels, Kavtar replied. Their technology appears to be metal-based construction with kinetic weapons and basic energy shields, certainly inferior to our own capabilities. Xelnos laughed to sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The Altarian Council commanded over 2,000 advanced warships, each one a masterpiece of engineering with quantum shields and plasma weaponry that could vaporize asteroids. These humans with their primitive metal ships were clearly scavengers hoping to claim territory in the post-war chaos. Deploy Patrol Squadron 7 to investigate these humans, Selnos ordered. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. Captain Ryan Torres of the UES Thunderstrike received the tactical alert, while his squadron was conducting reconnaissance near the former Korthak border. His communications officer, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, monitored the incoming transmissions from their sensor network. Sir, we have 12 Altarian vessels approaching our position, Kim reported. They're maintaining standard patrol formation, but their weapons are powered. Torres studied the tactical display. The Altarian ships were beautiful in their deadly efficiency, with hulls that gleamed like liquid silver, and energy signatures that indicated technology far beyond what Earth had possessed just 50 years ago. But beauty and advanced technology didn't always win battles. Signal the squadron, Torres ordered. Implement Formation Delta 7, and send a message to Admiral Stewart. Tell him we're about to provide the Altarians with a practical demonstration. The Altarian Patrol Commander, Captain Lysandra, watched the human ships through her tactical display with mild curiosity. The vessels appeared crude and utilitarian, lacking the elegant curves and advanced materials of proper warships. Their energy signatures suggested they relied primarily on fusion reactors and magnetic accelerator weapons. Analysis suggests these humans pose minimal threat, her tactical officer reported. Their ships appear to be constructed using primitive metallurgy and basic engineering principles. Lysandra nodded. Open communications. Let's see what these scavengers want. The response came immediately. Altarian vessels, this is Captain Torres of the United Earth Federation. You are entering human operational space. Please state your intentions. Lysandra almost laughed. Human operational space. These beings had been in the galaxy for perhaps a few months and they were already claiming territory. Captain Torres, she replied. This space belongs to the Altarian Council by right of salvage. Your presence here is unauthorized. I'm afraid I can't accept that, Torres responded. This territory is now under human protection. I'm going to have to ask you to withdraw. Now Lysandra did laugh. 12 primitive ships demanding that an Altarian patrol squadron withdraw. Either these humans were incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Captain Torres, I suggest you reconsider your position. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Torres's response surprised her. Captain, I suggest you review your tactical analysis. You're about to learn why superior technology doesn't always guarantee victory. The human ships suddenly broke formation, moving in a pattern that Lysandra had never seen before. Instead of maintaining the standard line of battle formation favored by all galactic navies, they split into 3 groups and began moving in what appeared to be random directions. They're scattering, her tactical officer reported. Should we pursue? No, Lysandra said, studying the display more carefully. The human movement wasn't random at all. It was coordinated in a way that suggested they were implementing some kind of tactical doctrine that was completely foreign to galactic military thinking. Maintain formation and prepare for engagement. Captain Sandra Price commanded the flanking group aboard the UES Ranger. Her orders were simple. Demonstrate human tactical superiority while minimizing actual damage to both sides. The goal wasn't to destroy the Altarian ships, but to prove a point about the changing balance of power in the galaxy. Target their shield generators, Price ordered. Concentrated fire on the lead vessel. Make it look like we're trying to disable rather than destroy. The human ships opened fire with their kinetic weapons, streams of accelerated metal projectiles that hammered against the Altarian shields. The energy barriers flared and sparked under the impact, but they held firm. To the Altarians, it looked like a desperate and futile attack. Captain Lysandra watched her shields absorb the human weapons fire with professional satisfaction. Return fire. Target their propulsion systems. Let's end this quickly. The Altarian plasma weapons lanced out toward the human ships bolts of superheated energy that should have vaporized the primitive metal hulls. Instead, something unexpected happened. The human ships continued firing even as their hulls began to glow from plasma impacts. Instead of retreating or exploding, they seemed to absorb the damage and keep fighting. Sir, her tactical officer reported with confusion in his voice. The human ships are continuing to function despite direct hits from our primary weapons. Lysandra frowned. That shouldn't be possible. Altarian plasma weapons could punch through the hull of any known ship design. These humans should be floating wreckage by now. Torres watched his damage control reports with satisfaction. The Altarian weapons were powerful, but human engineers had designed their ships to survive exactly this kind of punishment. Redundant systems, damage-resistant construction, and automated repair systems meant that a human ship could continue fighting even when it should be dead. Engine room reports were down to 80% efficiency, his engineering officer reported. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7, but damage control teams are responding. Good, Torres replied. Signal groups 2 and 3. Execute Phase 2. What happened next completely shattered Altarian understanding of space combat. The human ships that had been taking devastating fire suddenly accelerated toward the Altarian formation, closing to point-blank range where energy shields were least effective. At the same time, the other human groups completed flanking, maneuvers that brought them into position to fire on the Altarian ships from multiple angles. Captain Lysandra found herself fighting a three-dimensional battle unlike anything in her training. The humans weren't following standard tactical doctrine at all. They were treating space combat like some kind of pack hunt, with different groups coordinating to trap and overwhelm individual targets. All ships, defensive formation, she ordered. Concentrate fire on the nearest human vessels. But the human ships refused to cooperate with her tactics. Instead of engaging in the kind of formal battle that had characterized galactic warfare for centuries, they kept moving, kept changing position, kept forcing the Altarians to react to their initiatives. Captain Price's ship, the UES Ranger, took the heaviest damage during the engagement. Her hull was scarred by plasma burns and several systems were offline, but she kept her ship in the fight even as atmosphere vented from multiple breaches. Ma'am, recommend we withdraw for repairs, her damage control officer suggested. Negative, Price replied, watching her tactical display. We're exactly where we need to be. She was right. The Ranger's position forced the Altarian ships to divide their fire between multiple targets, preventing them from concentrating enough firepower to actually destroy any of the human vessels. It was a calculated sacrifice that demonstrated something the Altarians were only beginning to understand. Human crews were willing to accept damage and casualties that would cause other species to retreat. The battle lasted exactly 14 minutes. When it ended, 6 Altarian ships were disabled or destroyed, their crews either dead or captured. The remaining Altarian vessels were badly damaged and completely demoralized. Not a single human ship had been lost, though several were so heavily damaged they could barely maneuver. Captain Lysandra sat in her command chair, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. Her beautiful ships, with their advanced technology and superior firepower, had been systematically dismantled by what she had dismissed as primitive scavengers. Captain Torres, she transmitted, her voice shaking slightly. We surrender. Torres' response was delivered with the calm professionalism of someone who had expected exactly this outcome. Captain Lysandra, prepare to receive boarding parties. Your crews will be treated according to standard. News of the Altarian defeat spread across the galaxy within hours. Admiral Lauren Wright stood in the command center of the UES Constitution and watched the diplomatic channels light up with urgent messages from every major civilization. The Vegan Confederacy was requesting immediate trade negotiations. The Centauri Republic was offering mutual defense treaties, and even the proud Korthak Alliance was asking for formal talks. Ma'am, we're receiving over 200 communication requests, reported Communications Officer Beth Martinez. Every faction seems to want to establish relations with us immediately. Wright nodded with satisfaction. Fear was a universal language, and the galaxy was finally beginning to understand that humanity wasn't going to be ignored or dismissed. She turned to Colonel Marcus Chen, who was reviewing tactical reports from across human-controlled space. Colonel, what's our current operational status? Wright asked. Chen consulted his datapad. We have active operations in 47 systems. Admiral Stewart is coordinating negotiations with the Zephyrian remnants. Captain Adams is establishing forward bases in former Korthak territory, and Captain Rodriguez has secured 3 major trade routes. Overall, we're ahead of schedule. Wright walked to the strategic display that showed the current state of galactic civilization. Red zones marked areas still contested by various factions. Yellow indicated neutral territories under negotiation, and green showed systems now under human control or protection. The green zones were expanding rapidly. The key to this entire operation is speed, Wright explained to her staff. Every day we wait gives the established powers time to organize resistance. We need to present them with accomplished facts before they can coordinate an effective response. On the other side of the galaxy, War Chief Graxith of the Korthak Alliance was learning exactly what Wright meant. The massive insectoid warrior stood in his war chamber aboard the battleship Vengeance and studied reports from his remaining commanders. The humans had appeared in Korthak space just as they had everywhere else, but unlike other species, they weren't offering careful diplomatic overtures. They have claimed the Wolf 359 system, reported Sub-Commander Klickstall, his antennae twitching with nervous energy. A human force of 8 ships defeated our garrison and is now establishing what they call a forward operations base. Graxith's mandibles clicked in anger. Wolf 359 was a strategic system that controlled access to 3 major shipping lanes. The Korthak had lost thousands of warriors defending it during the war with the Zephyrians, only to have it seized by upstart humans who had appeared from nowhere. How many ships did we have defending the system? Graxith demanded. 18 vessels under the command of war leader Vextar, Klickstall replied. All were destroyed or captured. Graxith was silent for a long moment. 18 Korthak warships, each one crewed by veteran warriors who had survived centuries of combat, defeated by 8 human vessels. It suggested that the reports from Altarian space weren't exaggerated. These humans possessed military capabilities that couldn't be measured by simple ship counts or weapon specifications. Captain Tony Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Patriot and surveyed his new domain. Wolf 359 had been chosen specifically because of its strategic importance. Control of this system would allow humanity to project power throughout the former Korthak territories, while demonstrating that human promises of protection were backed by military force. Sir, the Korthak prisoners are requesting to speak with you, reported Security Chief Dan Foster. Rodriguez nodded. Bring War Leader Vextar to the conference room. I want to have a conversation with him. Vextar was a typical Korthak warrior, standing nearly 3 meters tall with chitinous armor that had been scarred by countless battles. His compound eyes studied Rodriguez with a mixture of respect and confusion. The human captain was small by Korthak standards, lacking any obvious physical adaptations for combat. Yet he had achieved something that no Zephyrian commander had managed in 3 centuries of warfare. You fought well, Rodriguez said, gesturing for the alien warrior to sit. Your defense of the system was tactically sound and your crews showed exceptional courage. Vextar's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement. Yet we were defeated. Your ships absorbed damage that should have destroyed them and continued fighting with coordination that suggests shared consciousness. Rodriguez smiled. Not shared consciousness. Shared training. Every human officer studies the same tactical manuals, practices the same scenarios, and learns from the same historical examples. When we fight as a unified force. The Korthak fight as unified forces, Vextar protested. No, Rodriguez corrected. The Korthak fight as individual warriors who happen to be in the same battle. There's a difference. Rodriguez activated the holographic display and showed recordings from the recent engagement. Vextar watched his own ships fighting with the disciplined fury that had made the Korthak Alliance feared throughout the galaxy. But as the battle progressed, he began to see what Rodriguez meant. Each Korthak ship fought magnificently, but they fought alone. When one vessel was damaged, the others continued their own attacks rather than adapting to support their wounded comrade. When the humans maneuvered to attack from an unexpected angle, each Korthak ship responded individually rather than as part of a coordinated defense. Your warriors are brave, Rodriguez observed, but they're not connected. Human crews are trained to think of their ship as part of a larger organism. When one part is damaged, the others compensate automatically. Vextar studied the tactical display with professional interest. This coordination requires extensive communication networks. It requires trust, Rodriguez replied. Every human captain knows that their fellow officers will support them, even at the cost of their own ships. That knowledge allows us to take risks that other species consider suicidal. The truth of that statement was being demonstrated across the galaxy as human forces established control over key systems through a combination of military, superiority, and political maneuvering. Captain Nicole Adams had secured alliances with 3 minor species in the Outer Rim by offering protection from the chaos that followed the Great War. Captain Sarah Wilson was negotiating with Zephyrian fleet commanders who were beginning to realize that cooperation with humanity offered better prospects than continued independence. Admiral Wright received regular updates from all these operations while coordinating the overall strategic picture. Humanity was moving faster than any galactic power had ever moved before, seizing territory and establishing facts on the ground before their opponents could organize effective resistance. "Ma'am, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command," Martinez reported. Wright accepted the communication, and the image of Fleet Admiral Robert Hayes appeared on the main screen. Hayes was the architect of humanity's galactic strategy, the man who had spent decades planning for this moment. "Admiral Wright," Hayes said, "I'm pleased to report that the Colonial Council has approved Phase 2 of the expansion plan. You are authorized to begin direct negotiations with the remaining major powers." Wright felt a surge of excitement. Phase 2 meant that humanity was ready to stop being reactive and start imposing their will on galactic events. Instead of responding to other species' initiatives, they would begin making demands and setting terms. "Understood, sir," Wright replied. "What are our primary objectives?" "Control of the galactic trade networks, establishment of human military bases in all major systems, and formal recognition of human authority by the surviving civilizations," Hayes answered. "The galaxy has had enough time to understand our capabilities. Now it's time for them to understand our intentions." The transmission ended, leaving Wright to contemplate the magnitude of what humanity was attempting. They weren't just seeking to become another galactic power competing with the Altarians and others for influence. They were seeking to become the galactic power, the final authority that all other species would defer to. Colonel Chen approached with another tactical update. "Ma'am, intelligence reports suggest that the Altarian Council is attempting to organize a coalition against us. They're reaching out to the Vegan Confederacy and the Centauri Republic." Wright considered this information carefully. A coalition of galactic powers could potentially field enough ships to challenge human expansion, but only if they could coordinate their efforts effectively. The problem was that none of these species had experience working together, and their military doctrines were fundamentally incompatible. "Let them try," Wright said finally. "Coalition warfare requires trust and shared objectives. These species have spent centuries competing with each other for territory and resources. They're not going to develop effective cooperation in a few months." She was right. Across the galaxy, the various civilizations were discovering that organizing resistance to humanity was far more difficult than they had expected. The Altarians wanted to maintain their technological superiority, the Vegans insisted on controlling trade routes, and the Centauri demanded recognition of their territorial claims. Each species was more concerned with advancing their own interests than with presenting a united front against the human threat. Meanwhile, humanity continued to expand, to establish bases, to negotiate agreements, and to demonstrate their millie. Admiral Dan Foster stood before the Galactic Assembly on the rebuilt station of New Harmony and looked out at representatives from every surviving civilization. 2 years had passed since humanity's arrival, and the galaxy had been transformed beyond recognition. Where once there had been chaos and competing factions, there was now order under human leadership. "Distinguished delegates," Foster began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "We gather today not as conquerors and conquered, but as partners in building a better future for all galactic civilizations." The assembled delegates listened with varying degrees of acceptance and resignation. Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Remnant sat in the front row, his uniform now bearing the insignia of the Human Galactic Alliance. Beside him, War Chief Grax wore similar markings, his massive form somehow diminished by the symbols of cooperation rather than conquest. Prime Minister Zelnos of the Altarian Council maintained his elegant composure, but Foster could see the defeat in his silver eyes. The Altarians had attempted to organize resistance 3 times in the past year, and each effort had been quietly dismantled by human intelligence networks and diplomatic pressure. 2 years ago, this galaxy was dying, Foster continued. Ancient enemies had destroyed themselves fighting over territory that none of them could properly govern. Entire star systems lay abandoned, trade routes were infested with pirates, and billions of beings lived in fear of the next war. Foster activated the holographic display that showed the current state of galactic civilization. Green zones indicating human-controlled space now covered nearly 60% of inhabited systems. Yellow zones showed areas under human protection, but governed by local species. Red zones, indicating active conflict or lawlessness, had shrunk to less than 5% of the galaxy. "Today we have peace," Foster said, "not the peace of exhaustion that followed your Great War, but the peace of prosperity and cooperation." Captain Amy Turner sat in the observation gallery and watched the proceedings with professional satisfaction. She commanded the peacekeeping force that had made this transformation possible, coordinating human military units across hundreds of systems. Her ships didn't rule through fear but through competence, providing security and stability that allowed trade and diplomacy to flourish. The rebellion in the Tau Ceti system had been Turner's greatest challenge. The local government, led by a charismatic Altarian named Veskar, had declared independence from human authority and attempted to restore the old ways of competing civilizations and territorial disputes. Turner's response had been swift but measured. Instead of simply crushing the rebellion with overwhelming force, she had offered Veskar and his followers a choice. They could continue fighting a war they couldn't win, or they could join the new galactic order as respected partners. The battle that followed lasted only 6 hours. Turner's ships systematically disabled the rebel fleet without destroying it, capturing rather than killing the crews. When Veskar finally agreed to surrender, he found himself not in a prison cell but in Turner's ready room, sharing human coffee and discussing the future of his system. "You could have annihilated us," Veskar had said, still struggling to understand these humans who fought so effectively, yet showed such restraint and victory. "Destruction is wasteful," Turner had replied. "Your people have skills we need and knowledge we can use. Why destroy what we can build together?" That philosophy had become the foundation of human galactic policy. Unlike the ancient empires that had ruled through conquest and intimidation, humanity offered something different: competence, stability, and the promise of shared prosperity. Colonel Beth Harris commanded the integrated defense network from her headquarters on Luna. The system she had designed incorporated the best technologies from every galactic civilization, creating a unified defense force that could respond to any threat within hours rather than months. The key to maintaining galactic peace, Harris explained to a group of alien military officers during a training session, is not having the biggest weapons or the strongest ships. It's having the ability to deploy the right force to the right place at the right time. The alien officers, representing species that had once commanded vast fleets, listened with respectful attention. They had learned that human military doctrine was fundamentally different from anything they had encountered before. Where their own traditions emphasized individual heroism and overwhelming firepower, humans focused on coordination, efficiency, and achieving objectives with minimal waste. Captain Jake Morrison, the officer who had made first contact with Commander Veltar, now served as the Director of Galactic Integration. His job was to help former enemies work together as partners in the new order. It was challenging work that required patience, diplomacy, and a deep understanding of alien psychology. The hardest part, Morrison often told his staff, isn't convincing them that we're in charge. It's convincing them that being in charge doesn't mean we want to destroy their cultures or steal their dignity. Morrison's greatest success had been the integration of Korthak military units into the Human Defense Corps. The warrior species had initially resisted any form of cooperation, viewing service under human command as a betrayal of their martial traditions. But Morrison had found a way to channel their aggressive nature into constructive purposes. Korthak warriors now served as elite assault troops and boarding specialists, their natural combat abilities enhanced by human tactical doctrine and support systems. War Chief Graxith had become one of humanity's most effective military commanders, leading integrated units that combined human strategic thinking with alien capabilities. Admiral Foster concluded his address to the Galactic Assembly with a vision of the future that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. "We stand at the beginning of a new age," he said. "An age where the galaxy's resources are used for construction rather than destruction, where different species work together instead of fighting each other, and where peace is maintained not through fear, but through shared prosperity." The applause that followed was genuine, if somewhat subdued. The assembled delegates understood that they were witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. The galaxy would never again be a collection of competing powers struggling for dominance. Captain Sandra Price, now serving as the Director of Economic Development, had overseen the restoration of trade networks that had been disrupted by centuries of warfare. Human engineering teams worked alongside alien specialists to rebuild damaged infrastructure and establish new shipping routes. The galaxy's economy was growing faster than it had in over 300 years. The secret to our success, Price often explained to visiting dignitaries, is that we don't try to do everything ourselves. We identify what each species does best and create systems that allow them to contribute their strengths to the common good. It was this philosophy that had made human rule acceptable to civilizations that might otherwise have continued fighting. The Altarians found their advanced technology in high demand for peaceful purposes. The Zephyrians discovered that their administrative skills were valued in governing newly integrated systems. Even the Korthak found that their warrior culture had a place in the new order as protectors and peacekeepers. 5 years after humanity's arrival, Captain Morrison stood on the observation deck of the UES Unity, humanity's new flagship, and watched ships from a dozen different species working together to construct a massive space station that would serve as the new galactic capital. Lieutenant Laura Kim approached with the daily reports. "Sir, we're receiving applications from 17 more systems requesting membership in the Human Galactic Alliance. The Andromedans have submitted their formal application, and even the isolationist Rigel Consortium is expressing interest in trade agreements." Morrison smiled as he watched an Altarian construction ship working alongside a Korthak transport to install a new communications array. The sight would have been impossible during the old era of competing civilizations and endless warfare. "The war is finally over," Morrison said quietly. Kim looked puzzled. "Sir, the war ended 5 years ago when the Zephyrians and Korthak signed their ceasefire." Morrison shook his head. "No, Lieutenant. That wasn't the end of the war. That was just when they stopped shooting at each other. The real war was the competition for dominance, the struggle for resources, the endless cycle of mistrust and conflict that kept this galaxy from reaching its potential." He gestured toward the construction project visible through the viewport. "This is what victory looks like. Not the defeat of our enemies, but the transformation of enemies into allies. Not the conquest of territory, but the creation of a community. The galaxy doesn't need more conquerors, Lieutenant. It needs builders." And so the galaxy entered its new age under human guidance. The Great War that had lasted 3 centuries was indeed over. Ended not by the exhaustion of the combatants, but by the arrival of a species that understood something the others had forgotten during the long years of conflict. The strongest victory was not the one that destroyed your enemies, but the one that convinced them to become your partners. Humanity had not saved the galaxy through superior weapons or advanced technology, but by offering something that had been missing for